Good afternoon. My name is Mike Carney, and I'm a member of the Historical Committee for ASHRAE. And we're here in lovely St. Louis, and it's the 13th of June. And it's my privilege to interview Mr. Otto Nussbaum, who is a long-standing ASHRAE member and a fellow in the Society, and a leader in several technologies that the Society is interested in. Otto, welcome to St. Louis. I hope you've enjoyed your stay here, and we wish the Cardinals had won a game or two for us, but...
Well, I'm a Pittsburgh fan.
Oh, you are? Well, that's probably why we haven't had much success here of late.
I lived in Pittsburgh for quite some time.
Did you?
It's very difficult not to be a Pirates fan.
Well, we would have hoped to have cured you. I think if Vince Coleman had got a hit late in the game Tuesday, or Monday, I guess it was, we might have cured you of being a Pittsburgh fan. But no. Well, the purpose of this interview, as I mentioned, is to get down on tape some of your impressions of ASHRAE and the industry. But first, I think it's important to get an impression of Otto Nussbaum. You came to this country when, and how you got started in the air conditioning business?
Well, before that, I think I ought to tell you that ASHRAE has done a great deal for me. I think that the chances are that whatever I have achieved in those 50 years that I've been a member is because of the help that I got from people that I've met through ASHRAE, because of the things I have learned while I was an ASHRAE member. And I think that whatever contributions I have made to ASHRAE are very slight by comparison with what I have gained from being an ASHRAE member.
That's interesting. Well, do tell us, though, when it was you came to the United States.
Well, I landed here on what was then Armistice Day of 1937. And the reason I came here is because I lived at that time in Vienna. And the Republic of Austria at that time was very anxious to end being a republic and becoming a part of Greater Germany. And to me, as a Jew, there was nothing to look forward to.
Well, I don't know if von Schuschnigg thought the same at that time either, do you?
Well, Schuschnigg, of course, was the one who promoted it. What he did not anticipate is that it wouldn't do him much good, because after Austria became part of Germany, which was less than 6 months after I left, he was not a very important part of what became of Austria. As a matter of fact, I think he wound up here not too long.
Yes, sir, he did. He ended up here in St. Louis, and he taught at Washington University.
That's correct. He was apparently not clear in his own mind about what he really wanted, because he was what we called in Vienna a clerical. And the Nazis, I think, were not particularly religious people. I think they might have tolerated Catholics, but I don't think they were particularly anxious of pleasing the clergy or getting along with it. Of some other German clergymen, who were critical of the Nazis, and as a result either didn't survive or found it very difficult to survive.
That's true.
Anyhow, that was why I left. And I was young at that time, and I was about less than 24 years old. I had just got my mechanical engineer's degree 6 months earlier in Leningrad.
In Leningrad?
In Leningrad. I lived in the Soviet Union for about 5 years, and that was during the time when I was of the age where you normally go to college. And I went to college in Russia, in Moscow, as a matter of fact, but I got my degree in Leningrad.
I see.
And that was somewhere in the spring of 1937 when I got my degree. And that was at the time when Stalin was still running the Soviet Union. And but for non-Russians, it was a very pleasant kind of existence. I made lots of friends while I lived there, and the only incentive I had to leave was the fact that after I graduated from school, that was tuition free, by the way. There was no such thing as tuition for college education in those days in the Soviet. Maybe there isn't now, I don't know that. But in any event, my incentive to leave at that time was that I was told by the people who were watching me that I had a choice. I could either become a citizen of the Soviet Union or leave the country. And they didn't give me much time to make a decision. And it was a real easy decision to make, because it was pretty clear that for the people who lived in the Soviet Union, this was a great big prison. And the walls were not like the Berlin Wall. They were much more difficult to cross. And so I said that while I had a good time here, I appreciated the opportunity to study. I was also working at the same time while I studied, that I would prefer to go back where I came from, which was Vienna, because that's where I belonged, and that's where I felt more comfortable. And they said that is perfectly all right, but in that case you better pay us tuition for the 5 years that you studied here. And I did.
You did?
Yes, I did. I thought that it was not unreasonable. I learned enough to become a mechanical engineer. As a matter of fact, I specialized in refrigeration while I studied there.
While you studied there, okay.
And I also worked at the same time at night as a shift manager in the cold storage plant.
I see.
So when I graduated, I already had some practical experience at the same time.
When you arrived here in 1937, that must have been a great change for you personally and culturally.
I spoke the language, probably not fluently, but I had no difficulty. I learned English and French when I went to high school, and I remembered enough to be able to communicate and all that. But on the other hand, that was during the end of the Depression in this country, and there were no opportunities for me to function as an engineer in 1937, and I had several strikes against me. One of them was, of course, that my English was faulty. Secondly, that I had an education that probably was not, on the surface of it, sufficient from the viewpoint of a prospective employer. And thirdly, I also had the handicap of being a Jew, and in those days, large industrial companies would hire Jews, but they would have to be exceptionally good.
I see.
And I did not.
But that was a
It was an unspoken.
That you
kind
felt.
of a. I don't think they officially would have told anybody that they don't hire Jews, But there were very few Jews working in industry in 1937. Most Jews were merchants and businessmen, very successful
professionals,
yes. Lawyers,
doctors,
physicians,
yes,
but not in situations where they would have to be hired. For instance, I applied for a job with Carrier Corporation. They had a training course before they hired somebody in a technical capacity, and it took them a very short time to make up their mind that they did not want me. They didn't say why, but as I said, I had several handicaps, so my first 2 years in this country were I did not function as an engineer. I got odd jobs, which I don't think are too interesting. I survived for about 2 years.
Okay. Well, what was your first job then back in the industry? You obviously knew you wanted to be in the refrigeration.
Yes, I was convinced that eventually I wanted to function as an engineer, and about a year later, my first job was as a refrigeration serviceman. I carried a toolbox in Manhattan.
In Manhattan?
In Manhattan, and I was servicing refrigerators at Horn and Hardart Company.
Yeah, what company?
Horn and Hardart.
Horn?
Which, self-service food stores. You ever hear of that?
No, how do you spell the last name? H-A-R-D-E-R?
H-A-R-D-A-R-T, I believe.
Okay.
Yeah, there were lots of those stores. They were all over New York City and all the other boroughs, and the only time you could service their refrigerators was after midnight, between midnight and 6 a.m., because the rest of the time they were busy, and they didn't want people in overalls climbing around their nice, clean food stores and disturb their customers. So that's what I did for about perhaps a year or so. And I think that was very useful.
Oh, yeah.
Because it introduced me to the American way of making refrigeration work. What I did in Russia before I came here was take the ammonia refrigeration. And in this country, in the food stores, it was probably, for the most part, at that time, sulfur dioxide, methyl chloride, and eventually they started using Freon. And so I worked with my own hands, servicing refrigeration, and I did that until about the end of 1939. And then I got a job as a laboratory engineer with Kramer Trenton Company, who just sold out, as a matter of fact. You might have read about that in the...
Now, where are they located? Kramer Trenton?
In Trenton, New Jersey.
In Trenton, New Jersey?
Yes. I moved to Trenton at that time I used to live in Jersey City on the other side of the Hudson River from New York. And I commuted into New York. I moved to Trenton, and I got a room at the YMCA in Trenton, which was about 1 block from the railroad station, so it didn't take me very long to find a place to live. And it cost me $3 a week in a very nice, comfortable room.
Jeepers.
And that's how I got started as an engineer in the United States. And as a matter of fact, I worked for this company in Trenton for almost 25 years from then on.
For Kramer Trenton?
Yes, and when I left, I was the chief engineer.
What type of work did you do with Kramer Trent?
Well, I started as a laboratory engineer. I was performing tests, writing test reports, and eventually learned how to draw conclusions from test results. And I was testing not only refrigeration, but also they were in the heating business, and we were testing heating convectors, something that you were familiar with in Nesbitt, aren't you?
Yes.
Because that's something that isn't being used very much today. But it was interesting, and I learned more about heat transfer. I also learned more about testing methods, how to establish a steady state so that you could take readings. And so it was quite interesting and quite useful. And the next year, in 1940, Mr. Kramer introduced me to ASHRAE in Philadelphia.
In Philadelphia?
Yes.
So in 1940 was the first time?
I joined ASHRAE in Philadelphia in 1940. And in 1966, I became the president of the ASHRAE Philadelphia chapter. So it took me a long time before I finally made it the president of the chapter, but I did.
Who are some of the people that were kind of inspirational for you during that period of time? Were there folks that you really looked up to and learned a lot from during that time? And
I learned an awful lot from Mr. Kramer, who was my employer. He was quite an interesting individual. I don't think he was a graduate engineer, but he was a man who taught himself. And in addition to being a good engineer, in my opinion, he also was a very forceful person. A dynamic kind of a personality. He was tall, had a impressive speaking voice, could project his voice from here to any place he wanted. So, you know, one of those people who attract the waiter's attention by just whispering. And that's something that not everybody knows how to do. But I respect him a lot. He just passed away about a year ago or so. He was in his 90s when he passed away. But I think he was probably the first individual that I met in my career that, if you ask me, I look up to and that I respect and that helped me advance myself.
What is his first name?
Israel.
Israel. Well, there you go. See, right there you had it.
Did you ever meet him?
No, sir, I didn't. That was not my privilege to meet him.
He was pretty well known in ASHRAE. Not recently. You know, he was active when he introduced me to ASHRAE. He was active on a national level. He published quite a few things.
Well, Philadelphia had quite a few manufacturers involved in the air conditioning field, and really from Philadelphia came quite a few people who were leaders of respect of technologies and what have you.
Like Albert Nesbitt.
Did you know Albert Nesbitt personally? I never met him.
No, I did not know him because when I came to work for Nesbitt, it was about, I guess, 1964.
Yeah.
About 25 years after I started with Kramer. He already had sold out to ITT.
Yes. And Nesbitt, the nature of that company changed, but even within Nesbitt, we always remark on the number of people who really were very, very strong players with Nesbitt.
Correct.
And Albert Nesbitt did some things, particularly from a marketing standpoint, that were really quite remarkable.
Well, he also had some patents to his name, I believe. Also, the man who was his chief engineer, Sam Miller. Do you remember?
Sam Miller, I knew, and John McElgin before him.
John McElgin. I met both John McElgin and Sam Miller. I did not have too much contact with either one of them because when I joined Nesbitt, they were several layers above me, and I was on the. They recognized me, and I recognized them, but that's about the extent of it. I know that John McElgin did quite a bit of heat transfer research and got some patents to his name and published quite a bit of information that I read and profited by. I don't think he was ever active in ASHRAE. He was active in ASHRAE, I believe, in Philadelphia, but I did not get much into that at all.
Well, okay, well now you're in Philadelphia and you've been involved with Kramer Trenton. Is that where you got involved? I was told at one time that you were really considered quite an expert in coil theory and manufacture and design.
Yes, and that is why Nesbitt hired me. I thought of leaving the Kramer Trenton Company simply because many people in my position and of my age, I noticed, were progressing much better by not staying in one and the same place for a lifetime. And when I saw this opportunity to go to work for Nesbitt, they advertised actually for a refrigeration engineer in the Wall Street Journal. That's how I noticed that there was an opening for me. And it so happens that I knew somebody who was with ITT in Philadelphia in another division. I think it was General Controls. I don't know if you remember that or not. But he visited Nesbitt. He introduced me to Sam Miller, and Sam Miller was the one who really hired me. And that's how I started moving around.
Moving around a little bit.
Yes, and it turned out that that was a good idea. Not only from the viewpoint of making a change, but from the viewpoint of getting a broader horizon. And I think a lot of people are still doing that. I think that being with one and the same company works out very well for very few people. I know some people who stayed with the same company, and I know some people who stayed with Kramer Trenton Company for 50 years, but I don't think it did them any good. I think eventually they reached a point where they just became in a routine situation. Of course they grew, they got more money and all that. But I think from a viewpoint of being creative, that's the wrong thing to do, to stay in one of it. Unless you're looking for a career up the ladder in a place like Carrier or something like that. But Kramer Trenton was not that kind of a situation. There was no career up higher the ranks because it's a family-owned company, and it was clear that any higher position than I had as chief engineer was reserved for family members. And that's how it turned out.
Okay, so you went in '64 to Nesbitt, and then I think you ended up down south for a little bit, didn't you, Otto?
Yes, the minute I started working for Nesbitt, I got telephone calls from other people that I knew, who asked me why I went to work for Nesbitt. And very frankly, I said, I tried to be loyal to the Kramer Trenton Company, not to go work for any of their competitors. That's why I went to Nesbitt. Nesbitt did not consider Kramer on their level, and Kramer, of course, did not consider Nesbitt a competitor. They were an entirely different kind of business. But very soon after I went to work for Kramer, there were a number of companies who were Kramer's competitors, who apparently had read or observed what I was doing, and The one who was most persistent was locking coils. So about a year and a half after I went to work for Nesbitt, and after corresponding with Larkin for about a year, I decided to move away. That was a very difficult decision to make, not for me, but for my wife.
I see.
Because my wife was a native of Trenton. She is a native of Trenton.
I see.
And she had never lived outside of Trenton, and I don't think she had ever traveled much further than the other side of the Schuylkill River.
Well, I hope, did you move to Atlanta from there?
We moved to Atlanta.
Well, I hope that she has learned to accept the South and that city a little better.
Yes, as a matter of fact, she's here. If you would talk to her today, she would say that she was probably, when she was young, a deterrent in my career, because the chances are that I had some other opportunities much earlier, and the reason we did not pursue them was because she was so attached to Trenton. Her parents, of course, lived there. She had a big family in the Philadelphia area, so we did not consider any opportunities very seriously.
I think your career speaks for itself, Otto. I know that you've been very successful in your career, and
thank you. Well, I feel that I have succeeded in a lot of things. By this time, I think I'm working on patent number 27.
Is that right?
Yes. They are, most of the patents that are in my name were assigned to the Kramers, but there are some patents that Nesbitt owns in my name, which is now still ITT, I guess, and Larkin owns some patents in my name.
Let's focus on the patents for a minute. Anybody who has 27 patents has done, one, a lot of research, and two, a lot of independent thinking, and three, you've learned how to deal with our government successfully.
Well, I let the lawyers do the dealing with the governor. By the way, I don't know whether that belongs here or not, but I attended a seminar today, and the last speaker was a man who apparently has a great deal of experience in serving as a technical expert in the court. And he told a story where a ship was about to sink, and the captain ordered everybody in the lifeboats, and there were not enough lifeboats, so there was a lawyer and his entourage on the ship, and they offered to swim ashore. So the captain said, I appreciate your courage. Are you a good swimmer? The lawyer said, yes, I am. And so all of my colleagues here jumped in the water, which was shark infested, and got to shore, and the lifeboats got there after him. And the captain came in the lifeboats, and he asked him, how you made it? How did you make it through all these shark-infested waters with all your people, and everybody survived? And the lawyer says, well, that was just a bit of professional courtesy.
Between sharks. Well, all right.
You can cut that part out, but it is something that I got from an ASHRAE seminar.
There you go. It shows that good political acumen. So do look back on your patents and the things that you have received credit for and created. Of these, which are things that you are particularly proud of and think really were an advancement?
Well, there is one particular product which is called Kramer Thermobang, and the original patent was in Mr. Kramer's name. In those days, it was possible to get a patent in your name without having all your collaborators named on it. But I subsequently contributed enough so that there were some other patents on the same system in my name. That is still being used, and the Kramer Trenton Company just sold out to a company called Ardco, I think a West Coast company. We're going to continue to still produce the Kramer Thermal Bank, and I saw a news item that they just assembled the first one somewhere in a plant in Yuma, Arizona. Well, this is probably one of the things that I had a hand in. I contributed to it.
Tell me, I don't know what that product does. Is it a method of controlling refrigeration?
It's a refrigeration system, and it's a refrigeration system in which is primarily designed for sub-freezing cold storage, and it defrosts automatically, and it uses energy storage, stored energy for defrosting rather than outside sources of energy. So it's an energy efficient system, and is well recognized and respected, and probably fairly unique and without much competition.
That's good.
I also think one of the other things that I am fairly happy with is the fact that when I first started in the refrigeration industry, air-cooled condensing was only used for household refrigerators, very small refrigeration systems, and I had the idea of using air-cooled condensers for large capacities, and today that's very commonplace. You can see under 200-ton air-cooled condensers. In those days that was unheard of. For large refrigeration plants, you would use either cooling towers or perhaps evaporative condensers, but not air-cooled. And today air-cooled is a very accepted method of condensing. In fact, there was an ASHRAE tour here Monday afternoon to a very large supermarket in St. Louis. Is it Deerberg's?
Yes, sir.
Yes. And they had large air-cooled condensers on the roof, so that's something that made me feel good.
That's good.
I published a paper on air-cooled condensers for large tonnages, and it was an ASHRAE meeting paper in St. Louis.
In St. Louis, huh?
Yes, and the meeting was here in St. Louis at the Chase Hotel. Does that still exist?
The Chase Hotel it still exists, but I believe it has been sold or it has ceased being a hotel for some
That's
reason.
where that ASHRAE, it was a summer meeting, as a matter of fact.
In St. Louis.
That was, and my paper was on the economics of air-cooled condensing, and I actually demonstrated that in spite of the fact that air-cooled condensers are less energy efficient in summer, that if you operate them the year round and let the condensing pressure go down where it will in winter, that on a yearly basis they can be made to operate just as economically as water-cooled. That was before the energy crisis, but
well, of course, I think we're beginning to appreciate and incorporate the cost of maintaining anything that is involved with water and air passing over water. That has a high maintenance component to it, and it's tough to deal with.
Maintenance of water-cooled condensers is something that has become automatic. It's being controlled now with microprocessors. If you look at that Deerberg supermarket, you could have just as well done it with water-cooled condensers as with air-cooled, with all the microprocessor controls and programmed maintenance and all that that they have there. But I think the decision to use air-cooled equipment was not so much maintenance, in my opinion, as it was that the people who installed it and possibly the people who designed it were probably more comfortable with air-cooled condensing. Just as you are probably more comfortable with driving a Buick rather than a Chrysler, something along those lines.
I see. Okay.
It's something that you're used to, that you feel comfortable with, where the bulk of your experience is, and I'm the same way.
Yes. I think we all are. We have our habits and our traditions that we get comfortable with. Any other of your patents that you're particularly pleased with and have seen them bear fruit like that?
Yes, one of the other things that became apparent after I introduced air-cooled condensers for industrial refrigeration was the fact that it turned out that during the cold season, the condensing pressure with air-cooled condensers was so low that it wasn't high enough to force the refrigerant through an expansion valve. You need a certain amount of pressure difference, as you well know, for that to happen. So the problem became to find a way to artificially raise the head pressure in winter high enough to get that pressure to force the refrigerant through the expansion valve. And so I came up with some ideas how to do that. There were some ways to do it in those days, but they were not practical for large air-cooled condensers. And this idea was also patented and by the Kramers, and it was marketed under the trade name of Winterstat. And they built it into most of their refrigeration systems for a long time. It's not being used today. At least to my knowledge, it's not very popular today because it's not energy efficient. It does raise the head pressure artificially, and you don't want to do that if you want to operate in an energy efficient fashion.
That's true. That's true. Now, you got involved with ASHRAE in Philadelphia, and were you involved in the workings of committees and at the national level?
Yes. Well, initially, of course, I was active in the Philadelphia ASHRAE chapter. I was a speaker there several times, and during my Philadelphia career, 1 year, I got a Best Paper Award from the Philadelphia chapter. That was a very nice desk pen. I guess it was a Schaefer pen with a marble base, and I still have that on my desk. That goes way back, but I'm still happy with that. And eventually I got interested on the national level in technical committees, and I started getting involved in what is now TC 8.4. It's primarily concerned with air to refrigerant heat transfer equipment, and eventually I became chairman of that TC, and that was the first achievement that I had on a national level in ASHRAE. Eventually I got into other technical committees, and I got into the Research and Technical Committee, I got into the Standards Committee. I was chairman of the Metric Committee when conversion to SI metric was the important issue in the society.
Whatever happened to that? What are we going to do with it? Are we ever going to get over this foot and inch and pounds in this country?
Well, we now have two versions of every ASHRAE handbook. We have an SI version and an inch-pound version. So we're getting there very slowly. We also have an ASHRAE metric guide that I think is going to be updated very soon. And I was involved in very deeply in preparing the first ASHRAE metric guide. I had a little bit of background for that from my European education.
I wish you'd do a better job with getting us down to the metric system.
In that, Clint Phillips.
Sure enough.
Clint Phillips was the first chairman of the metric committee before me, and he was very anxious to promote the idea of SI conversion, and that lasted until he became president. But I think after that there were some influential people who did not think that this was an important cause for ASHRAE.
Well, those
with
things.
the energy crisis and the standard 90, and so those were the things that eventually pushed the SI movement into the background. I think it's getting back there again.
Yes, I think it will.
I'll tell you what seems to me is going to be one of the incentives, and that's that the United States of Europe, which are going to start in 1992 or something like that.
Yes.
It seems that the United States, this country, is very anxious to participate in that coming prosperity in Europe, and I think it will be, they are completely converted to SI method in Europe, so we will have to be manufacturing and marketing and being conversant with the SI system. But Canada is already completely converted to the best of my knowledge.
So it's time we get on that.
Yes. Well, Canada still has some problems. This is a very short story where somebody goes to a Canadian wholesaler and he wants a piece of 25 millimeter pipe, and the guy behind the counter says, "How do you want it, in a 10-foot length or 20-foot length?"
You mentioned that ASHRAE has been very important in your life and in your progress here, and I'm sure you've explained a little bit about how important you are to the things that ASHRAE is involved in. Can you describe a little bit about your association with ASHRAE as an organization and how it's helped you in your work?
Well, it helped me primarily because I met people that were knowledgeable, that I could exchange experiences with, and eventually it also helped me find employment in places that I was interested in. It helped me with getting published when I wanted to, but the most important thing, of course, is that I established a lot of friendships, a lot of business contacts that were very useful to me, not primarily from a business viewpoint, because I'm not too much of a businessman, but it helped me get information from people, exchange experiences with people, and learn a great deal from the association with them.
You've developed a lot of close friends in ASHRAE.
Yes.
I know that.
Well, there are quite a few older people in the society who know me by my first name, such as you, for instance.
Yes, sir. I am very proud to know who Otto Nussbaum is. What do you see ahead for our industry? You've been involved in the advancement of it, and you mentioned the encouraging the use of air-cooled condensing, and been gratified to see that expand and be a common trait. Where do you see us going now with the technologies that you've been involved in? What kind of things do you anticipate seeing develop?
One of the things that I'm a little bit troubled with is the fact that a great deal of our energy now is going into developing new refrigerants. Mm-hmm. We're being forced into that by legislation or by pending legislation, mm-hmm. by necessity, let's put it that way. But I think a great deal of creative energy and expenditure is going into the development of new refrigerants, mm-hmm. which may or may not be as good as the freon, the halocarbon refrigerants that we know about. We got 60 years or more experience with the halocarbons, with the freons, that makes them reliable. We know all about them. There's a great deal of research that the society did, mm-hmm. with the existing freons, and I think it's unfortunate that we have to spend so much time and money and energy into developing other refrigerants about which we don't know enough. At the best, we will have some laboratory experience with them. Mm-hmm. When we start using them, the cost will be exorbitant, mm-hmm. and it will take a long time before we reach the level of confidence that we have into the refrigerant that we are now using.
Do you see us ever increasing our use of ammonia as a refrigerant as a result of these changes?
I'm very, well, not enthusiastic, but I'm very anxious to help the wider utilization of ammonia, mm-hmm. because that too is a refrigerant about which we know everything, mm-hmm. that needs to be known about. It's older than the halocarbons, it's reliable, mm-hmm. it's energy efficient refrigerant, and it's a very, very cheap refrigerant. Mm-hmm. When we're going to start using substitute hydrofluorocarbons, they will probably cost at least 10 times and probably more because of ammonia. Mm-hmm. And this is one of the incentives that I see that this industry has, is to pay a little bit more attention to ammonia, because mm-hmm. ammonia is a harmless refrigerant. Mm-hmm. It breaks down long before it ever gets into the ozone layer, and is being used in all kinds of other industries, and we know what the hazards are with ammonia, and we've learned how to deal with them.
Yeah. Do you see any impediments to the use of ammonia in comfort cooling applications?
Well, the main impediment is that Underwriters Laboratories classifies it, I don't know what the class is, but 2 or 3 grades below the halocarbons, and that of course has held up the development of ammonia as a refrigerant for comfort air conditioning, or even for industrial air conditioning. But it's feasible.
Mm-hmm. I think it is.
It's feasible. As a matter of fact, Will Stecker, whom you probably know, has just published an article or 2 in Heating, Piping and Air Conditioning, which outlines the advantages of ammonia, and I agree with him fully. Because ammonia was the first refrigerant that I ever learned about, and I think the important thing about it is that it's much better known, and Well, let's put it the other way. There are very few things that we don't know about ammonia. And there's almost everything that we don't know about all those new refrigerants.
Yes, sir.
And well, what I'm driving at, of course, is that all this energy that goes now into trying to develop new refrigerants could be put to much better use if we could do research into other related fields, into fields where we could refine our knowledge of refrigeration and maybe make some breakthroughs.
Yeah.
Which we haven't done.
What kind of interest do you have? Where's Otto Nussbaum going now? What's your next challenge? What's your next patent going to be on? If you can talk about that.
Well, I'm interested in air conditioning now. I'm interested in indoor air quality, and the latest patents that I have are related to indoor air quality. They're related to individual comfort in large office buildings. The ideas that I'm working on now have to do with people being able to select their own level of comfort. You know that in large offices now the thermostat is always under lock and key because every individual wants a different temperature and a different amount of air movement, and so the only way to keep an air conditioning system running is to set it and then lock the thermostat so that nobody can do anything about it. But only about 20 or 30% of the inhabitants of that office are happy with the air conditioning. Where I worked, my last job in North Alabama was in a fairly large general office, and Alabama has pretty hot summers.
Yes,
but at the height of summer, you would see some of the women have an electric resistance heater underneath their desk because they were feeling uncomfortable with the air conditioning, while the men, of course, were working in shirt sleeves. With this system that I have in mind now, and that I have some patents on, every individual, every workstation will have their own thermostat and their own airflow adjustment, so that they can select their own comfort condition.
And have that vary. I think that's the ultimate zone control, isn't it? That each workstation be allowed to make that selection and what have you. I think we can do that, and I think that's a worthy.
And eventually, of course, all that can be done with microprocessors, so that you deliver a certain amount of air to each workstation. But then the ultimate adjustment will be made by the person who occupies that workstation. And that's particularly important because you practically in every desk today, you see either a computer or at least a monitor, you know, and that creates its own heat load, and to some people it's a disturbance, and by being able to adjust their own temperature and their own air movement and their own airflow direction, they can deal with that a little bit more comfortably. They'll spend less time at the water cooler or less time chatting with somebody in the hallway or in the ladies' room and smoking less. And there are some indications that you can achieve a very substantial improvement in workplace productivity, at least in office buildings.
Well, I think if a person is uncomfortable, certainly it's going to affect their productivity. Let's get back to ASHRAE for a minute, Otto, if we could. Your tenure and your involvement in ASHRAE has been thorough and intensive since joining in 1940. Within ASHRAE, folks that you've been particularly impressed with in your association? I know that ASHRAE is full of people that are impressive people, but if you'd like to name a couple that you...
Yes, if you want me to. There was one man in Philadelphia very early in my career, Charles Leopold. I don't know whether you remember the name. He was the president of ASHRAE years ago, and he was the one who designed and supervised the installation of the air conditioning system in the Pentagon when it was built. He was a very creative consulting engineer, probably at that time the best known in the Philadelphia area. And one of the people who worked for him, who as a young fellow at that time, is Walter Spiegel, who eventually became a consulting engineer in his own right, and he's a friend of mine now. And of course, he was a president of ASHRAE not too long ago.
Yes.
But he started his career working for Charles Leopold and probably learned a great deal there before he ventured out for him.
It's interesting. It's still very much a help me out with the word, where the craftsmen and the guild people taught the apprentice. The apprentice is the word I was really looking for.
Mm-hmm.
Very much of our business is an apprenticeship, and you go through an education, and then you go through experiences in the workplace, and you apprentice.
Yes, well, there are many scientists in the society, but there are just as many craftsmen like myself in the society too. I know a bit about heat transfer theory and all that. I also have learned how to program computers and all that.
You're kidding. Tell me you've gotten in the computer age.
I have a computer at home, and as a matter of fact, I published computer programs, and I've gotten quite a bit of good feedback on the computer programs. They're not sophisticated. They're not the kind with all the bells and whistles and multiple colors and all that. But they get you from here to there very quickly. And as I said, I've published some, and I'm getting some very satisfactory vibes about what I have accomplished with my computer program.
Well, that's great.
The reason I know how to program computers is when I worked in Pittsburgh for Halstead and Mitchell. That was in the late 60s, early 70s. That's when computers first became commonplace. And I was in charge of engineering there, but I had a man working for me who was a computer programmer but did not know enough about heat transfer, whatever went into the programs that I needed to create. I had a very difficult time communicating with him, and I decided I better find out what he's doing. And I took several courses at the University of Pittsburgh at that time, and I learned programming, and I have no difficulty designing programs and debugging programs if I have to.
That's great. That's great.
Well, I think it's important.
Yes, it is.
I think that you're very badly behind the times if you don't understand computer languages, or at least a minimum about how computers function. Very important also in control systems. So all our sophisticated control systems are now computer-based.
Well, we're going to bring this interview to a close, but I want to give you an opportunity to make any points that you'd like to make that we haven't covered before about your relationship with ASHRAE or with the technologies that ASHRAE is involved in. Have we missed a point that you'd like to make? Or
no, I'm still active in ASHRAE. I hope to continue to be active. I'm now a member of the Research and Technical Committee, and I enjoy the work on the Research and Technical Committee. I'm also active in some other technical committees in my field of in the field that I specialize in, and I hope to keep it up.
I'm sure you will. And Otto, ASHRAE has benefited a great deal from your interest and participation, and I anticipate that it's going to continue to be a two-way street where Otto benefits and ASHRAE and the people in ASHRAE benefit. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. And I didn't know that I'd enjoy visiting with a Pittsburgh fan as much as I have. I knew I'd enjoy visiting with you. Thank you, Otto.
Thank you.
Okay. Anything you guys need from us? Okay.